Sorry, kiddos. I received a phone call that I had to take for just a second. Part 2. As I was saying, each one of those fields has its own track that you can basically take to a PhD. So when you go that far, whether it be in acting or in directing, getting an MFA, which stands for Master of Fine Arts, which in the world of in the artistic world of theater, right, that is the terminal degree, meaning you can't go any further. Like, you can't get a PhD in acting, right? But you can get an MFA in acting. You can get an MFA in directing, an MFA in lighting design or sound design or costume design. A good friend of mine has her MFA in puppeteering from the University of Connecticut, which is like the only program in the whole country. She's very good. And in case you're wondering, the video that I made you UTD kids watch of Dirty Turk, she did the puppets for that. That's my friend Noelle. She has her MFA. She's a master puppeteer. So each of those people have their own craft, and it's a track that you study on, and they all come together, right? For someone like the producer, they might have a master's degree in theater administration, or an MBA in business, or an MFA in, I don't know, theater, art, and society, whatever it might be. But they're going to be studying things like philanthropy, things like grant writing, things like theater management, different than stage management. Theater management, right? The business side. So there's a lot of crossover still, even though those are separate tracks, right? Like, sometimes the director is going to act in the show, right? Sometimes the person who wrote the show is also going to direct the show. Sometimes you might have the master carpenter who runs your scene shop where all the stuff is built, who's also designing your lights, right? There's a lot of crossover. But those are the basic areas, the basic ways that we understand the differences in theater as an occupation, right? So theater is also work in the sense that it's not play, right? It is a play, but it's not play. Like, we're not children at play. Although that word has been used to denote what a play is, right? There has been kind of this double association word play between those things, a double meaning, if you will, since all the way back in Greece and China. This idea of playing games and playing at theater. And in fact, the Romans brought the two together and basically did them side by side, right? And that has been carried on all the way up to modern times in many ways. And there's books written about that. In fact, in Shakespeare's time, in the places where they would put on Shakespeare's plays, like the Globe, for example, they would also do bull baiting contests in there. So there's kind of been this relationship between putting on a play and playing, or communities at play, since the very beginning. In fact, in Rome, the festivals where they would do plays was called the Ludi Romani, right? The word ludi or lude comes from the word luden, which is the root word for play. And so it's this idea, this sort of this double association of both of those things at the same time. But we have to separate them to a certain extent, because there is a big difference, right? Playing is, there's a lack of basic structure and organization to playing. Even if you're playing a game with rules, right? You're still playing, you're still free playing. Theater has got to be distinguished from that, from sport and from child's play, because in theater, it's got pattern. It has intent, right? We know that Hamlet is always going to die in Act 5, for example. That's the book's example. I think it's a great example. We know that Oedipus, the king, is always going to gouge his eyeballs out at the end of the play. We know it. We go to that play. We buy tickets to that play because we know that Oedipus is going to gouge his own eyeballs out. We know that Hamlet's going to die, right? But the art of theater that separates it from play or sport is that there is a preordained format to how we get there. There is a structure to how we get there. And the art of theater, or the mastery, to come back to the idea of masters at work, right, is how do we, as masters, as craftsmen of theater, keep Hamlet alive in a way that is interesting and that is unique and is unsuspected, so that when he dies, the audience, even though they know it's coming, is surprised by it and is mesmerized by it. And they get the payoff of the ticket that they bought to come and see Hamlet die at the end, right? They got the payoff of watching Oedipus gouge his eyeballs out, right? How do we keep his eyes in until the moment where he cuts them out in a way that's interesting and unique and subtle? That's the art of theater. That's the thing that makes it different. Now, theater is also art, right? It also, there is a certain amount of aesthetics and design that goes into making theater what it is, as we talked about before. But art is more complicated to talk about. It brings to mind things like creativity, imagination, elegance, power, aesthetics, finesse, things like that. We expect art to capture something about the human spirit, right? And touch upon something that is familiar but at once elusive inside the human condition. Sorry about the wind, everybody. I'm out here because I'm trying to stay away from my kids because, you know, they're kids. When we pursue art, we are pursuing a certain kind of humanity, and we find similar values in things like religion, right? That pursuit of the human spirit, of human perfection, of human truth, identity, all that good stuff, right? But the difference between art and religion is that art is accessible without subscribing to the rules and values, the systematic rules and values of religion, right? It's accessible to all people because it's touching on fundamental human stuff. And both Eastern and Western religions have used art as a part of the way that they teach and educate people about faith. It's kind of interesting. Now, theater also involves impersonation, right? I would even say that impersonation is an interpretation of characters, is the single most important aspect of theater. It's the foundation of playing in theater, right? And I mean, just imagine that's been a thing and a difficulty since the very beginnings, right? Imagine the Greeks and the Romans trying to figure out how to present characters on stage. And how did they do it? Well, they used masks, right? It's a little bit different back then, and we'll talk about that more when we get into the history. But mask work has been around since the very beginning, and in fact, when we talk about the different design elements of theater, we're going to talk about how costuming and makeup, including mask work, is probably the oldest form of theater, but also the one that is most overlooked in today's modern theater, because the aims of theater have changed, right? We're no longer in these massive outdoor amphitheaters on the side of a mountain where we need makeup and costuming in order to see. So they kind of get overlooked. But they've been in there since the very, very beginning. And one could even say that theater in the West started when an actor first stepped out of the chorus and put an unpainted mask on his face and delivered lines from the perspective of one person. Like, that's when that happened. And in point of fact, legend has it that the very first person to do that was a guy named Thespis, which is why theater people are called thespians. You might have heard that before. Thespians. It's because of Thespis, the first actor. So, where are we? Performance. Theater is also a kind of performance. But what is performance, right? It's vague. It's complicated. One could define a performance as a series of actions taken for the ultimate benefit of someone else. A strange entity that we call an audience. But what's an audience, right? Well, if you look at the theorist Peter Brook, who I'm not going to make you read, even though I should, Peter Brook says that all it takes is for someone to walk across a bare stage and someone else to watch. And then suddenly you have a performer and an observer, and an act of theater is born. That's a pretty good definition. But what's a stage, right? I mean, the theoretical query can go on and on and on and on about what is theater, what is a play, what is a stage, what is an audience, what is a performer. Anything can be any of those things, and that's kind of the point. What we're trying to decipher is, when do we separate it out from the normal goings-on of everyday humanity into a place and a package where it becomes theater, right? A private conversation between two people is simply communication, but if someone else is watching, right, and that conversation becomes engaged with an awareness that someone is watching to impress a certain point or to look a certain way, they become an audience. And the two people talking become performers. The theater takes our everyday performance modes, because we all perform every day, all day, and it turns them in to artistic expression. And that is kind of the point. That's the idea of what is a place. It is the moment when the performance modalities of our everyday lives separate out and become something more. Thus endeth chapter 1.